this lesson, you'll learn what it means for a number to be raised to a power, how to represent the repeated multiplication symbolically, and the reason behind using parentheses in exponential notation. Let's go ahead and get started. If I had a number that I wanted to multiply by itself several times, let's say 5, and let's say that I wanted to multiply 5 3 times, we often use exponential notation to write that expression. So in other words, instead of writing 5 times 5 times 5, it's very common to see 5 to the power of 3. The way we write exponential notation is we represent the number that we want to multiply by itself as the base, and then we have a very little number on the top right-hand corner, and we call that the exponent. Sometimes it's also called the power. The exponent tells us how many times we're going to multiply the base by itself. So, let's think of a different number. Let's say I have 3 times 3. How would you write that in exponential notation? Go ahead and pause the video and give it a try. Welcome back. If you wrote 3 to the power of 2, you would be correct. We look at our base being 3, that's the number that we want to multiply by itself, and we notice that we want to multiply by itself 2 times. So our exponent is 2. 3 squared, or 3 to the power of 2. Now in algebra, we're going to have to deal with a lot of variables and a lot of exponents. So let's go ahead and get started getting comfortable. What if we had a and wanted to multiply that a by itself 4 times? How would you write that in exponential notation? Go ahead and pause the video again and give it a try. Welcome back. If you wrote a to the power of 4, you would be correct. We notice that we're multiplying a, in this case our base, 4 times, and therefore our exponent is 4. Great job. This works with everything, including fractions. Let's say instead of a, we had a over b. And let's say that we wanted to raise this entire thing to a power of 3. What does that mean? Well, that basically means that we have the fraction ab multiplied by itself 3 times. Even though it looks complicated, this is nothing more than what we did before with one number. In this case, we just have fractions. So, if I had b over g, and I wanted to multiply b over g 3 times, how would you write that in exponential notation? Go ahead, pause the video and give it a try. Welcome back. If I want to write b over g times itself 3 times, then I would write b over g to the power of 3. Notice that I include parentheses in both these examples. We're going to talk a little bit more about it in a few minutes. But parentheses become really important when you want to specify that what you want to raise to the power is this entire thing that's inside the parentheses. You notice in the last couple of examples, I used parentheses to let you know that I was going to raise that entire fraction to a power. Let's start with integers first. What if I wanted to have -4 and multiply that by itself 3 times? Then in order to write that in exponential notation, I would write -4 to the power of 3. My exponent in this case is 3 because I'm multiplying -4 3 times. And notice that my base, -4, is inside parentheses. That's really important. If I were to not put parentheses, for example, and I were to just say, hey, I want a negative and a 4 raised to the power of 3, I'm not really being quite specific. And actually, this has a completely different meaning than -4 with parentheses raised to the power of 3. In fact, what this means is that I am just raising the base, which in this case is just a 4 to the power of 3. So basically this just means 4 times 4 times 4 3 times. And then, oh yeah, by the way, let's put this negative sign over here. And that is very different than if I were to write parentheses. Let's say, for example, that I have a variable, negative a, and I want to multiply it by itself 3 times. How would you write that in exponential notation? Go ahead and pause the video and give it a try. Welcome back. So if I had a negative a and I want to multiply it by itself 3 times, in this case, my base would be negative a. So I want to make sure I include that in parentheses. And because I'm multiplying it 3 times, my exponent would be the number 3. What if I had negative 4/8 multiplied by itself 4 times? How would you write that in exponential notation? I notice that negative 4/8, it's multiplied by itself 4 times. So my base is negative 4/8. And because I'm multiplying the entire thing plus the negative in it, I'm going to include my parentheses in there, and my exponent would be a number 4. So let's take a look at these last two examples where we had negative a raised to the power of 3 and negative 4/8 raised to the power of 4. So the question here is, when a negative number, or a variable for that matter, is raised to a specific power, how do we know the sign of the result? Well, if you remember the rules of multiplying negatives and positives, then we know that negative times a negative is going to give you a positive result, and negative times a positive is going to give you a negative result. So when we look at the first example where we have negative a multiplied 3 times, we have negative times a negative here, which would give you a positive result, and then multiply that positive result times a negative. So our final result here, even though we don't know what the value of a is, we at least know that our final result is going to be a negative. We have a negative 4/8 multiplied by itself 4 times, and we know that negative times a negative gives us a positive. And since we have an even number of negatives, then we know that ultimately our result is going to be positive. So if we were to summarize this pattern and generalization, what we can say is that whenever a negative number is raised to an odd power, then your result is going to be negative. And when your negative number or variable is raised to an even power, then your result is going to be positive. And so you can apply this to check your answer. So if you have a negative 8 and we raise that to the power of 7, that is an odd number, so I know that no matter what, my result has to be a negative result. And so in examples throughout these lessons, you've seen me write right underneath our expression how many times I am multiplying the base by itself in order to come up with the exponent. You may also see this written a little bit differently, where instead of writing, let's say I want to raise 12 to the power of 3, instead of writing 12 3 times, we're going to write 12 once, and then put some dots in the middle, multiplication sign to indicate that I am going to multiply, and then we just simply put 3 times here. And then that is the same thing as writing 12 to the 3rd power. So what if you had something like a, and you saw that it was multiplied 5 times? How would you write that in exponential notation? Go ahead and pause the video and give it a try. Welcome back. So when we have a multiplied by itself 5 times, as indicated right underneath the expression, then we know that this is nothing more than a to the 5th power. Let's say, for example, you had y multiplied by itself, but you didn't know necessarily how many times we were multiplying it. But you had y to the power of 5 there. What do you think goes in that line? I know that The exponent tells me how many times I'm going to multiply the base, so I simply have y multiplied in there 5 times.